May 1979, the United States, Texas. Mike Perdue was a charismatic bodybuilder in his early 30s. He was a mercenary, or at least that's what he told everyone. He loved to tell stories about his military adventures, the jungles of Vietnam, the battlefields in Southern Africa and Latin America, adventures in Rhodesia, the Bush War, Nicaragua, Uruguay, Operation Condor. Were any of these stories true? Maybe, who knows? They seemed believable. Perhaps he was a mercenary, perhaps he was a scam artist, or perhaps a bit of both. But whatever Perdue did for a living, it paid well. Anyone who visited his tastefully decorated house in Houston could tell you that. Even at a young age, Mike Perdue was militant and violent. As a teenager, he formed a youth gang inspired by the Ku Klux Klan that would beat up blacks and break into vacation homes along the Tennessee River. Perdue did jail time and subsequently bragged to his brother that he murdered a black inmate by holding his head in a toilet bowl. He was never charged, and it's not clear if that story was actually true. Operation Red Dog, Chapter 2, Crook's Paradise. If we allow Vietnam to fall, tomorrow we'll be fighting in Hawaii and next week in San Francisco, said Lyndon B. Johnson, the 36th President of the United States, who had flooded Vietnam with American troops. Mike Perdue used similar logic when he talked about his military career and mercenary jobs. He fought for America. All his wars were in America's interests.
Give war a chance!
So when he stumbled upon a newspaper article saying that the deposed leader of Grenada was seeking arms and foreign mercenaries to take the island back from the communists, he thought he might be just the man for the job. I mean, how hard could it be to topple Grenada's idealistic new regime? As the legendary mercenary colonel Mad Mike Hoare said, literally 30 or 40 well-armed ruthless men can overthrow a stable government. Meanwhile, Eric Gary, the deposed warlock, was staying at a friend's house in San Diego, California. He was determined to return to power. This cannot last, he told a reporter a month after the coup. Unless Maurice Bishop was stopped, the Caribbean will become a nest for communist activities. He passed the time discussing his theories on flying saucers. Mike Perdue arranged a meeting. They didn't sign a contract or enter any kind of formal agreement, but Perdue was good with people, and he had a feeling that Gary was interested. So Perdue began planning the invasion of Grenada and the restoration of warlocracy. Getting guns wasn't going to be difficult. This is America, after all. Perdue had the right connections and he knew where to get the money, or at least he had some ideas. What he didn't have was manpower. So he turned to a charismatic Louisiana native he met a few years earlier, the former imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, David Duke. That name should be familiar to anyone who follows alt-right politics. Duke epitomized the tactical move of many white supremacists from robes to suits, away from extremist politics and towards greater legitimacy. Perdue told Duke he was putting together a force to invade Grenada. He spoke convincingly, leaving Duke with an impression that he had experience in these types of things. The ex-imperial wizard had left the clan in '78, and he wasn't interested in foreign adventures, but he still had his old contacts. He provided Perdue a list of names and phone numbers to get him started. One of the numbers belonged to a man named Donald Clark Andrews, a businessman, a leader, and an ideologue of Canada's militant far-right movement. This sentence feels weird to say out loud, but back in the late 70s, Canadian far-right radicals were a real force. Andrews was the first person in the country ever to be charged with willfully promoting hatred. He supposedly plotted to bomb a visiting Israeli soccer team, although this was never proven. In 1975, he was charged with offenses ranging from plotting arson to possession of weapons and explosives. Andrews was just out of prison when Mike Perdue called the house to enlist his support for the invasion of Grenada. The Canadian loved the idea, and he assigned one of his lieutenants to Perdue. Arne Pully was a Canadian of Estonian heritage with strong anti-communist beliefs. He grew up in Toronto and spoke about having once worked for the US intelligence. He wasn't the only scam artist in the story to make such a claim. Meanwhile, the situation in Grenada was getting more and more complicated. Cuba had diplomatically recognized the new revolutionary regime and sent a shipment of arms to help them consolidate power. Cuban military advisors had set up a People's Revolutionary Army training camp in the island interior. The level of difficulty was increasing. But the island right next to Grenada, Dominica, was a different matter. According to a secret intelligence report dated July 20th, 1979, the CIA experts considered the new Dominican Prime Minister as a young opportunist who has appointed to the Senate the leaders of the country's three previously peripheral leftist groups. Politically, things were going in the wrong direction. From the CIA point of view, the entire Caribbean was fucked. A new regime dominated by pro-Cuban leftists had come to office in the neighboring St. Lucia, and in the St. Kitts Nevis, Premier Lee Moore, a former Black Power activist, was expected to follow a pro-Cuban foreign policy. No less than 8 former British colonies were becoming independent during a period of economic downturn. Various left-wing radical groups were well positioned to take advantage of the situation. Ultimately, Perdue didn't care which island to invade. Grenada, Dominica, it made no difference. But the later seemed more doable. Cubans haven't yet made it to Dominica. September 1979, Memphis, Tennessee. Perdue and Polly stepped out of the elevator into a luxury penthouse suite to meet J.W. Kirkpatrick. There was a Confederate flag on the wall. The bar had an impressive stock of booze. They had a few drinks with the potential investors in Perdue's mercenary enterprise. There were 3 of them, a lawyer, an accountant, and a doctor. The man talked about how great it would be to open a casino in the Caribbean. Perdue told them that Grenada was way too difficult, too costly, too time-consuming, and too bloody, he said. The communists were already on the ground in full force. But there was another island a few hundred miles to the north. With enough cash, Perdue could bring a team of mercenaries to Dominica and take it over. Investors could open banks and casinos and make piles of money. Polly, Perdue's Canadian companion, thought the idea of invading islands was stupid. His mission was to set up a business in Dominica that his fellow Canadian Don Andrews could use as a cover for the invasion of Grenada. But when it came to invading banana republics, Polly was a realist. You couldn't invade Dominica. They were British, Venezuelan, and French troops nearby. The island is sandwiched between Martinique and Guadeloupe. The foreign governments would never allow for the coup to happen. But the investors saw things differently. The next morning, Kirkpatrick gave Perdue $10,000 in cash. This was supposed to be an investment to be reimbursed as soon as the mercenaries had taken control of Dominica.